She was the woman who had it all.
She loved what she did. She loved her husband. She loved her children.
So why would she disappear without a trace?
It wasn't like her to just up and walk away.
I had that gut feeling something's wrong.
There's some type of foul play going on.
As police search for the truth, rumors swirl about betrayals and lies.
They did work together.
There's a whole lot more to this story. The jealousy just built more and more.
The whole thing is strange and convoluted.
And each twist is more shocking than the last.
They were following him.
His tires have been slashed.
His home was firebombed.
You just don't think things like this happen to people?
It became an all-in-all war.
September 6th, 2016, Memphis, Tennessee. It's a typical Friday morning in Hickory Hill, a comfortable suburban community on the southeastern edge of the city.
It's middle class, upper middle class type neighborhood, almost completely residential.
It's a great area, especially for the kids. You could raise your family, go to church. Schools are exceptional.
But for one Memphis family, this morning will be anything but ordinary. At 7 a.m., Hickory Hill homeowner Randall Freeman places a panicked call to 911.
911, where's emergency?
It's my wife.
Randall reported her missing.
Randall explains that when he woke up moments ago, he was surprised to see that his wife Kayla wasn't in bed beside him.
He walks around the house looking for her.
Kayla!
He still couldn't find her. She's not in the house at all. Randall goes into the garage. He sees the car.
He notices that the garage door is up.
And the driver's side door of Kayla's car is open.
Her keys in ignition.
Her purse is on the ground, and he knows this isn't right. Randall had a sinking feeling that his wife is in danger.
She's gone. Somebody took her.
Memphis native Kayla Ashford was initially quiet and reserved around strangers.
She was very shy, very polite.
But it was never long before her warm and friendly nature would come shining through.
Once you became comfortable around her, her personality opened up. Once you got her to smile or laugh, she was your friend, pretty much. When she laughed, everyone laughed because it was just that infectious. She just lit up a whole room. She just was a likable person. She had lots of friends.
But for all her friends, Kayla felt most at home with her family.
She was always around her family. She was very family-oriented. We're very close. If you saw one of us at Mom's house, you saw the other. We like to travel, so we would always be planning our next adventure. She was always looking for tickets somewhere or take a girls trip. She just really loved traveling. She worked with, she really loved that job.
But the real love of her life was a man named Randall Freeman. The pair were high school sweethearts who married in 2012.
They went to middle school together. But as far as dating, it became serious maybe around end of freshman year. He was a familiar face. She had felt comfortable around him.
They also had a lot in common.
He was kind of quiet, kind of reserved.
And just like Kayla, Randall worked hard.
He had a good job. He was in construction. The company that he worked with worked on housing projects. They were building up the neighborhood in Binghamton.
They were trying to redevelop this neighborhood a little bit at a time.
So he did a lot of hands-on work.
Over more than 12 years together, Kayla and Randall forged a strong bond.
I love you, baby.
I love you too. He seemed like a great guy. I was extremely happy for her.
They also had 2 beautiful children.
They both were really excited about the birth of their children. Motherhood was just awesome for her. She just enjoyed every minute of it. When she became a mom, it really brought a lot of joy to her. She was definitely involved. She absolutely wanted the best for her children. She's striving to do better for her life and for her family.
By all accounts, the Freemans had built the perfect family. But on the morning of September 6th, 2016, an ominous scene emerges from within the Freeman home.
Randall had just called 911 and reported that his wife was missing and possibly abducted.
I don't know, she's just gone. Somebody took her.
When officers respond to Randall's 911 call, the evidence suggests he may be right.
The police arrived and they started looking around and trying to figure out, okay, the keys are here, the purse is here, the car is here.
All her credit cards, driver's license, everything is there in the purse. But her phone is missing. All these things raise the alarm bells significantly.
But does that mean she's been kidnapped?
There was no sign that anybody had forced their way into the home, that there had been a struggle inside the car.
However, just outside the door, separating the garage from the rest of the house, the officers make a chilling discovery.
Kayla's pants are on the floor of the garage.
That immediately made police think that there was some type of foul play.
It's possibly a sexually motivated crime.
Oh my God!
In the fall of 2016, 29-year-old Kayla Freeman was living her best life.
Kayla had a great career, had been married to her husband Randall for 3 years, and had 2 beautiful children.
She loved her family. She was happy with her life.
But on the morning of September 6th, Randall calls the Memphis police and reports that Kayla has disappeared.
Her car is in the garage with the keys in the ignition.
He finds her purse and then her pants on the ground.
They began to wonder, was this a sexual abduction?
Although there's no body, there's no blood, there's no true evidence of foul play, police go ahead and call in the homicide division.
Major crimes, we have a possible abduction.
When homicide detectives arrive on scene, getting information from Randall is their top priority.
When Randall reported her missing, he didn't provide a lot of details.
Can you tell me a little more about what took place here last night?
He was initially distraught.
He didn't give any indication of what could have happened.
Sir, I know this is very difficult, but if there's anything that you could remember right now that you can share with us, it would really help us out.
Kayla went out with some friends, some people from work.
Randall tells police that she had got home pretty late. He had already gone to bed for the evening. And he heard her car pull in, but she didn't immediately come in the house.
Randall tells police that after hearing Kayla's car pull into the garage, he'd rolled over and soon dozed off again.
It was a little before 7 when I woke up and I realized she wasn't there. Kayla.
That's when he started looking for her and finds her car, her purse, the keys, and everything.
Could Kayla's disappearance be an abduction or worse? Randall's statement raises red flags for detectives.
I feared the worst from the very beginning. It's highly unusual for a mother to leave 2 young children.
She's in love with her children. She would never leave them.
Which, of course, brought detectives to their next question.
Were you and Kayla having any kind of problems?
No, not really. We argue sometimes, same as anyone.
Did any of those arguments ever turn physical?
No, I would never hurt Kayla.
Randall stated that he loved his wife very much.
Randall also doesn't hesitate when detectives ask if they can search his van and the rest of the house.
He's very cooperative. He wants to do everything he can to help the investigators find his wife.
After Randall wakes the children and drives them to a relative's house, detectives search the couple's home for clues.
It's just an average house in terms of the normal, everyday things.
Randall's van also appears clean.
We didn't see any signs of blood in his vehicle.
It was just frustrating because we really had no clue as to where she could be.
But just as detectives appear at an impasse, the case takes a startling turn.
Who lives here?
I'm sorry?
I want to report whoever owns this van.
This random man begins yelling and screaming.
He just happened to show up in the middle of all this. It's very odd.
The police calm him down, and he tells him that his name is Clayton James and that he lived a couple of blocks over.
According to Clayton, he'd stopped because he'd spotted Randall's van, which is still parked in the driveway in front of the Freeman's house.
He claims that this van has been stalking him.
It's been following me around for a week.
He had seen this van before. It was distinctive.
He wanted to know who that van belonged to.
When detectives tell him, Clayton appears to draw a blank.
I don't know, Randall.
But Clayton knew Kayla.
Yeah, I know.
She had gone to high school with this guy, and they actually were co-workers for a little while.
But he said he did not know that Kayla lived there.
Clayton claims to not know she's missing either.
When detectives tell Clayton about what's happened with Kayla, he's shocked.
Last night?
Yes.
Wow.
But is his reaction genuine? Detectives aren't so sure.
It's too coincidental that he just so happens to live down the street.
When was the last time you spoke to Kayla?
It's been a while.
He says he hadn't talked to her in over 2 years.
You think that her husband is following you?
Yeah.
Any idea why?
No clue.
He didn't realize at the time that it was a person married to someone he knew. He just knew this guy's messing with him.
Clayton assures detectives he'll let them know if he hears anything from Kayla.
They let him go for now, but the police are really concerned that he just so happens to show up at the house during the investigation.
Hoping for more information, the detectives reach out to Kayla's family, who are racked with worry.
We've already talked to Randall, and we got the news out that Kayla is missing.
No one can find her. She's not answering my phone calls. She's not answering my texts.
They were actively looking for her themselves.
I was still trying to piece things together. I just really couldn't believe that I have a missing sister.
Did she have any problems, enemies?
Everyone loved Kayla.
There's no one that even came to mind.
The family also doubts that Randall would have hurt Kayla.
I honestly didn't see anything that was just like a red flag or anything out of the ordinary.
Randall was looked at as a pretty good guy, a pretty decent man.
And most of all, the family's adamant that Kayla would never have strayed from her marriage.
Kayla was very faithful to her husband. She was focused on her family.
Most of what we got from the family during this initial investigation was responsible and reasonable, very stable person, devoted mother.
But could there be more to Kayla than she had been letting on?
She may not tell the family everything. We had to start digging a little bit more.
And when detectives begin reaching out to Kayla's friends, it's exactly as they suspected. Kayla has been hiding something.
It's discovered that Kayla and Randall's relationship wasn't always rosy.
I would say as of the last 6 months of her marriage, she started sharing some of the problems that they were having.
Kayla's getting a little frustrated with the marriage. She may be getting ready to leave Randall.
But it's Kayla's reason for leaving that really floors the detectives.
Randall was having an affair.
Less than 48 hours after Kayla Freeman disappeared from her suburban Memphis home, detectives have learned that Kayla's relationship with her husband Randall wasn't all that it appeared to be.
Randall had actually been having an affair.
So this whole picket fence, happy family scenario seems to be wiped off in the wash.
News of the affair makes detectives want to take a closer look at Randall.
They realized that Randall wasn't telling the 100% truth the first time that they spoke with him. And they really want to press him for more information.
However, Detectives also want to talk to the third member of the alleged love triangle, a woman Kayla's friends identify as 27-year-old Claire Parks.
According to Kayla's friends, she had recently confronted Claire about her affair with Randall.
Kayla and Claire had had words about it, but it never became violent.
On Monday morning, September 9th, detectives bring Claire down to the station for an interview, and she is very upfront about her relationship with Randall.
It was nothing serious. We were just kind of messing around.
Claire states that yes, she and Randall had been having a good time, and that was all it was to either of them, just a fling.
She informs officers that she had no intentions on trying to break up a happy home.
But Kayla found out.
Yeah, and she was pretty upset.
Her and Kayla had had words a couple times, but it was nothing that rose to the level of her wanting to harm Kayla. And she told police that the night that all of this happened, she was at home with her kids.
Obviously, we want to make sure we really confirm anything she says.
Detectives will also need to check up on what Claire says next.
While Claire is admitting about the affair, she goes on to drop another bombshell.
I don't even know why she's mad at me and Randall, though. She has no room to talk.
Claire brings up the fact that Kayla has been having an affair.
Are you sure?
Yeah, that's what Randall said.
He apparently was able to get into her phone, seeing messages and things of that nature.
According to Claire, Randall not only suspected Kayla was having an affair, he also knew the identity of her lover.
The man's named Clayton James.
Clayton was the guy who showed up at Kayla's house the morning she disappeared and claimed that Randall had been following him.
He told the police that he had no idea that she was missing or anything of that nature, that he was driving through that neighborhood and stumbled upon the van.
Now detectives are wondering, was it all a lie?
The whole thing is now much more strange and convoluted.
That afternoon, detectives bring Clayton down to the station and press him about the alleged affair.
You're not doing anybody any justice if you don't go down that rabbit hole. You have to check all these possibilities.
Clayton denies everything.
He swears and swears and swears that he's never had any type of relationship with her in any way. He said, I've never even hugged her before.
He insisted to officers that he was a happily married man.
And you didn't have anything to do with her disappearance?
No, of course not. I was at home all night.
Clayton's alibi is that he was at home with his wife and children.
And your wife, she'll back you.
Once Clayton realizes that officers are intending to speak with his wife, he becomes extremely nervous.
Clayton's not wanting to have the officers verify his alibi with his wife raises a red flag.
They're concerned that Clayton might be hiding something, and that makes them more suspicious.
It kind of brings to the detective's mind, what would Clayton do to keep someone from making these allegations to his wife?
When detectives follow up with Clayton's wife, Rachel, she appears completely in the dark about Kayla Freeman.
What's going on? Why am I here?
She's really confused as to why police are talking to her.
She's completely unaware of what the allegations are concerning her husband and Kayla.
Do you recognize the name Kayla Freeman?
No.
She doesn't know who this woman is. She doesn't know about an affair.
However, Rachel says that she does know one thing.
She tells police that she knows her husband. He's not a violent man. He's not going to do anything to hurt anybody, even if he was having an affair.
Rachel also confirms Clayton's alibi.
There's no way that Clayton had anything to do with that woman or her disappearance. He was at home with me all night.
Rachel tells detectives the same thing that Clayton said before, that he had been home with her as well as the kids all night.
But does that mean Clayton's alibi is as airtight as it sounds?
Since Clayton only lived a few blocks from Kayla, it's possible he could have slipped out in the middle of the night while Rachel and the kids were asleep.
Hoping to determine if there really was something going on between Clayton and Kayla, detectives subpoena her cell phone records.
Maybe there was some type of relationship, some kind of contact. We have to check and make certain.
However, detectives are still waiting on the records when the investigation takes another unexpected twist.
Detective Mullins.
They get a tip from Randall's boss, who says that the day after Kayla's disappearance, Randall showed up to work extra early before anyone else.
Randall's boss says he didn't think anything of it at the time, but that was before he found out that Kayla had gone missing.
That was the day that they were supposed to lay the concrete slab for the house that they were building. When everyone arrived at work, Randall had already laid the entire slab by himself.
Randall's boss shares with the detectives a horrific suspicion.
He believes that he knows where Kayla is buried.
Less than a week after Kayla Freeman disappeared, detectives working the case have just received a suspicious tip about her husband, Randall.
According to his foreman, Randall had come into the construction site early the morning after she disappeared and poured a concrete slab all by himself.
Maybe Randall showed up to work early that day to lay the slab by himself so that he could bury Kayla's body under it.
Detectives move quickly to act on the foreman's tip.
They have to secure a warrant to dig up that concrete slab.
While waiting for a judge to sign off on the search warrant, the detectives haul Randall in for questioning.
This time, they're playing hardball with him. They're letting him know that, yes, he is a suspect.
Why didn't you tell us you were cheating on Kayla?
They confront him with the information about the affair with Claire Parks, and he admits it. He says, yeah, he was having an affair with Claire, but that Kayla was having a relationship with Clayton as well.
She was hooking up with him.
Are you sure?
I know it.
He seemed a bit jealous, unstable, maybe paranoid about Kayla and her actions.
Randall's rage and his jealousy made police really become more and more suspicious.
He said things started becoming much more tense between them. They had had more arguments. There was a lot of accusations.
According to Randall, the simmering tensions had boiled over on the night Kayla disappeared.
He admits that there's more to the story, and he had left out a few things.
Randall says that when he'd heard Kayla pull into the garage, he hadn't simply rolled over and gone back to sleep.
Randall states that he did go out and confront her.
Kayla, where you been?
I told you, friends from work.
Don't lie to me.
He was paranoid at that point that she had been with Clayton, and they began arguing.
With your friends all day this
week. We've had this conversation, Randall.
To detectives, it sounded like Randall was working his way towards a confession.
Did you hit her?
What? No!
Randall claimed that he'd said his piece to Kayla and then stormed back inside.
They had a large fight, and she stayed in her car so that she could just ease her mind.
And she never came inside the house?
No, I waited, but she never came to bed.
According to Randall, he'd eventually drifted off to sleep.
He said, when I woke up, she was gone.
Naturally, detectives were more than a little skeptical of Randall's story.
You're not sure which part to believe, if any.
But do detectives know how the story really ends?
If we go dig up that concrete slab you poured, are we gonna find Kayla underneath it?
No, that's crazy.
He tells investigators he couldn't sleep, and instead of just sitting around the house pacing, he decided to go to work and get a jump start on things. Try to get his mind off of the possibility that something really bad might have happened to his wife.
Is Randall telling the truth?
Okay, you're free to go.
There's one way to find out.
By now, the judge had signed the search warrant.
From the station, detectives head out to the construction site, where a crew is already waiting.
A private contractor that does ground-penetrating radar work offered to come out. And sure enough, we have an anomaly. It's about 5 feet long, about 4 feet wide, about 2 to 4 feet deep. And that would be perfect for a body.
Now all detectives need to do is dig up the slab.
We got the city's general services to provide us a bobcat out there with a jackhammer to help us bust up the slab.
Even with heavy equipment, it's hours of back-breaking work.
This is a concrete slab for the foundation of a house. It's a pretty good size area, and we ended up busting up the entire slab, sifting through all the rubble.
Detectives are hopeful and excited that they will solve this case.
They were really optimistic that once they dug up the concrete slab, they would find Kayla.
There's a lot of hope. The news was there. Drones, cameras, everything.
But at the end of their search, the detectives come up empty-handed.
Although there was an anomaly, there was no body.
They didn't find Kayla. They didn't find any evidence of a crime.
We were there all day, literally all day, and came up with nothing.
It appeared that Randall was telling the truth.
And detectives are back to square one.
They didn't know where Kayla was or what happened to her.
But just as Kayla's trail appears to be going cold, the investigation into her disappearance takes another bizarre turn.
What?
The detectives are notified by a 911 dispatch, and there is a fire at Clayton James' home.
That was another shocker. I was like, what in the world? You know, like, what is going on?
All right, we'll be right there.
What happened?
Apparently, someone had thrown a Molotov cocktail and set it ablaze.
Detective Mullins.
1 week after Kayla Freeman vanished, police and firefighters have just responded to another urgent 911 call a few blocks away from her suburban Memphis home.
A 911 call comes into dispatch and it's Clayton James reporting that his house is on fire.
This is the guy that Randall has accused Kayla of sleeping with.
Someone has thrown a Molotov cocktail through Clayton's window, and his family had to escape from the house.
Clayton and his family are unharmed, and firefighters are able to extinguish the flames.
But as Clayton informed detectives, this wasn't the first bizarre incident that had occurred since Kayla disappeared.
He said that he'd been receiving text messages, phone messages, threats.
The next morning, detectives review footage from surveillance cameras Clayton had recently installed on his home.
When the police went through the surveillance footage, not only did they see someone throwing the firebomb, they saw who threw it.
The person firebombing the house is indeed Randall Freeman. You can see his face clearly, even at night.
After viewing the video footage, police immediately secure an arrest warrant for Randall Freeman for arson.
It doesn't really matter if the house burns to the ground, partially burns, or just has a little bit of damage from this arson. It's all the same.
The news of Randall's arrest floors Kayla's family.
My sister's missing, and you're setting other people's house on fire. How does this connect? And what is really going on?
Randall is committing arson against the person he believes that Kayla is sleeping with. That just made things worse in terms of our suspicions.
But given the timing, Randall's motive remains unclear.
Did Randall do this because of the affair, or did he do this because he began to think that Clayton was behind the disappearance?
Detectives are wondering if Randall is seeking vigilante justice.
Only Randall knows for sure, but he's done talking.
After he went to jail, he quit cooperating with us. He pretty much just asked for an attorney and wouldn't talk about it.
With Randall in jail on the arson charge, detectives turn their focus to Clayton James, who denied having an affair with Kayla.
You have to wonder, is Randall really paranoid and suspicious, or is he on the right track? Is she actually having an affair with this person?
But when detectives received Kayla's phone records, it appeared Clayton was telling the truth.
We couldn't establish any kind of real contact between them. And at the time of Kayla's disappearance, it didn't appear they were making any contact at all.
There was never any evidence of a relationship other than a friendship between Clayton and Kayla.
When detectives follow up with Kayla's family and friends, they also dismiss Randall's allegation that she had cheated.
Kayla was very faithful to her husband. She never, ever mentioned anything about another man because there was no man. That was just a slap in our face to even say something like that.
But if that was the case, why did Randall seem so convinced that Kayla and Clayton were having an affair?
I'm not sure what made him think this.
His obsession with Clayton James really stuck out to me. Even after Kayla was gone, he's still chasing after this man.
But does that mean Randall had also done something to Kayla?
For me, it's all funneling down to this is going to be a murder.
The question is, can detectives prove it?
They don't have any way to connect him to the disappearance of his wife.
We don't really have a witness that can say, you know, I saw somebody dragging a body out of a car. I saw somebody digging on the side of the road, or I saw somebody on a bridge throwing something in a creek. We don't have that kind of an eyewitness. And even the evidence that we do have is not really significant enough to say this proves it's a homicide.
Also, the homicide detectives do not have a body.
We don't even know if she's dead, technically. Even if we believe it, we don't know it. So in a way, we're missing everything.
Still, the detectives refuse to give up.
We never quit. We're not going to stop until we get all the answers that we can get and find those responsible and put them where they need to be.
Detectives spend long hours searching for Kayla's body.
We look at the satellite images of the area. We see there's wooded areas, there's bodies of water. We started trying to do some systematic searching of those areas.
All of their searches come up empty.
Weeks pass as Kayla's friends and family become more and more desperate to find her.
We did the flyers. Of course, it was on the news. It was on social media.
They put up a $15,000 cash reward, hoping that someone will come forward with information.
But after 2 agonizing months with no new information and no word from Kayla, even her family faces the grim possibility that she's never coming home.
Around Thanksgiving, I had that gut feeling. I don't know if you call it a sixth sense. You just know. But that closure piece was very important.
They just wanted her body.
But will a moment of indiscretion finally give Kayla's family the closure they crave?
After more than a year of no new information and no leads on the case, the police get a tip from a jailhouse snitch.
Apparently, Randy is talking in jail.
By December 2017, Randall Freeman has spent more than a year in jail awaiting trial on arson charges.
He was arrested for firebombing the home of Clayton James, the man he believed had been sleeping with his wife, Kayla.
He can't get out of jail. The bond is too high. We've got a very, very good case on Randall Freeman for the arson.
But will detectives ever be able to close the books on Kayla's disappearance?
Detectives believed Randall killed Kayla and hid her body, but they had no proof.
However, after months of dead ends, detectives receive what appears to be a promising tip from an inmate at the Shelby County Jail.
An inmate housed with Randall Freeman tells detectives that Randall confessed that he had killed Kayla.
These little tidbits that we get from jail conversation, things of that nature, is enough to keep us going.
But it's not enough to bring murder charges against Randall.
The skilled defense attorney will rip the case apart if the only thing that they have is a jailhouse snitch.
Although with his trial on the arson charges approaching, prosecutors believe they have some powerful leverage.
Since Clayton and his family were home when Randall firebombed the house, he was also charged with multiple counts of aggravated assault and attempted murder.
He is facing so much time with these charges that if convicted is well over 100 years.
Will Randall be willing to lead detectives to Kayla's body in order to shave off some prison time?
What we want from him is real simple. Where is your wife? What happened to your wife? You tell us that, and we'll talk about whatever plea bargains we can reasonably work out.
Kayla's family agrees to the plan.
They shared it with us about the plea, and we wanted to move forward with doing that.
Whatever they have to do in order to get a confession so that they can get Kayla's body back, they're willing to go with it.
It was something that we needed as a family to actually put her to rest.
Now, it all depends on Randall.
The prosecution confront Randall, and they bargain with him to get him a deal so that they would give him only 28 years just to get the body.
His back against the wall, Randall accepts the prosecutor's offer.
If he doesn't, he'll be buried under the jail. Now, he knows that at some point in time, he'll see the light of day.
Randall tells police that he hid the body in a creek not too far from the home.
Searching the area, detectives find human remains.
The body was completely decomposed. It had been out there for over a year, exposed to the elements. But in this case, we were able to confirm that it was Kayla through dental x-rays.
It was sort of a relief in a way that we could actually put her to rest and that my family had closure.
Despite the state of Kayla's remains, the medical examiner suggests a possible cause of death.
Regardless of whether there's skin or not, we do have forensic anthropologists that can examine the remains, and we found blunt force trauma, but there was not enough evidence to suggest he beat her to death, although he could have. Unless he tells us specifically, and he didn't, we'll probably never know exactly what happened.
But detectives believe at least some of what Randall told them about that night was true.
That night, Kayla went home. Randall confronted her.
Kayla, where you been?
I told you. Friends from work.
Don't lie to me.
He accused her of being out with Clayton.
Kayla, you've been going out every day.
How many times do I have to tell you
The
this?
argument became heated, and Randall lashed out in anger.
Every night with these ladies. You should be
I'm
home
sorry.
with me.
It's ladies from work.
I think that a physical fight between them just went too far.
After realizing what he'd done, Randall had gotten rid of her body. Then he'd scrambled to cover his tracks.
He staged the scene as though a kidnapping took place, and then proceeded to call 911 and play the role of a grieving husband.
But now, more than a year after he made that call, Randall stands before a judge and admits the truth.
Randall Freeman pled guilty to second-degree murder and aggravated arson and was sentenced to 28 years. He cannot get out till he's done 100% of the time.
Kayla's family would have liked to see him serve more time, but they've made their peace with the outcome.
I forgive him. There's no hate in my heart. He'll serve his time. Hopefully, he'll come out and say something to his children who will be adults when he's released.
But Kayla's loved ones still struggle to understand how an irrational obsession led to such a senseless tragedy.
Kayla hadn't done anything wrong. She had never cheated on Randall.
His rage and his jealousy got out of control and caused him to do the unthinkable.
That's what hurts me. Her kids were robbed of growing up with their mom.
It's really hard to know that she's not there. And I know that she wanted to be there.
The file had been sitting in evidence for so long that the label had begun to fade. The case number was still readable. The victim's name was still there. The date was still there. But almost everything else seemed to belong to another world. A world before smartphones, before modern DNA databases, before digital surveillance became part of everyday life. In 1999, a woman vanished from a quiet Ohio community, And within days, investigators were facing a mystery with almost no answers. There was no obvious suspect. Nori la lleve la witness. No murder weapon. No confession. Only a vehicle, a few scattered belongings, and a trail that seemed to disappear into the darkness. For years, people asked the same question. What happened to her? Then, more than 2 decades later, an investigator opened an old evidence box and found something that should have been impossible to miss. A tiny object, sealed away since the night she disappeared. It had no name on it, no explanation, no obvious connection to the crime. But when modern forensic testing was finally applied to it, the entire case changed. A hidden clue had survived for 25 years, and suddenly, the killer was no longer hiding behind the passage of time. On an autumn evening in 1999, the streets of the Ohio town were already dark by the time most businesses began closing. The temperature had dropped sharply after sunset. Porch lights appeared along quiet residential streets. Cars moved through intersections beneath pale street lamps. It was an ordinary night, the kind of night nobody expects to remember. But one person would never make it home. Her name was Laura Mercer. She was 31 years old, worked in an administrative position at a local manufacturing company, and was known by friends as dependable almost to a fault. If she said she would call, she called. If she said she would be home at a certain time, her family expected her. She had routines. She had favorite places. She knew the roads around town by memory. That evening, she left work shortly after 6. A coworker remembered seeing her walk toward the parking lot. Laura carried a small handbag. She had her keys in one hand. She smiled. Nothing about her behavior suggested danger. Security cameras were not everywhere in 1999. Most businesses did not preserve hours of footage. There were no smartphones recording every movement. Cell phone location data was primitive. A person could disappear between 2 intersections and leave almost no digital trace behind. Laura's car was seen leaving the company parking lot. Then the trail became uncertain. She had planned to stop at a grocery store. She never arrived. At approximately 8:20 that evening, a friend called her home. No answer. At 8:47, another call went unanswered. By 9:30, her family knew something was wrong. Laura's car was discovered later that night near an isolated stretch of road outside town. The driver's door was locked. The passenger door was slightly open. Her handbag was inside. Her wallet was inside. Her keys were not. Her car was not damaged badly enough to suggest a serious collision. There was no obvious sign of a struggle. And Laura was gone. Police initially treated the disappearance as a missing person case. That decision would later become one of the most debated aspects of the investigation, because the scene looked strangely incomplete. Her personal belongings were still there. Her car was still there. But she was not. The first officers searched the surrounding area. They walked through fields. They checked drainage ditches. They examined the roadside. They looked for footprints. They called hospitals. They contacted neighboring police departments. No Laura. By midnight, volunteers were arriving. Family members drove slowly along back roads. Friends searched parking lots. Officers checked motels and abandoned buildings. Every passing hour made the situation more frightening. Then, shortly after dawn, investigators found something. A single shoe. It was located several hundred yards from Laura's car. The shoe appeared to belong to her. That changed everything. The possibility of voluntary disappearance began to fade. Laura had left the vehicle on foot, or someone had removed her from it. Either possibility was troubling. But the investigators had no clear answer. They searched the area again. This time, they found a second object. A small silver earring. It was lying near a shallow drainage ditch. Laura's family identified it as hers. Now investigators had evidence that she had been outside the car. But still no Laura. The search expanded. Dogs were brought in. Helicopters searched fields. Volunteers walked through wooded areas. The local news broadcast Laura's photograph. Her family appeared on television asking for information. Someone must have seen something. That was what everyone believed. But the town had a problem. People had seen cars. They had seen headlights. They had seen ordinary traffic. Nothing seemed memorable. The investigators began reconstructing Laura's final known movements. She left work. She drove toward the grocery store. Then she apparently changed direction. Why? No one knew. A receipt eventually provided one answer. Laura had stopped at a convenience store around 6:42 p.m. She purchased coffee and a pack of gum. The cashier remembered her. But when investigators asked whether she seemed frightened, the cashier could not say. Laura had behaved normally. She paid. She left. That was all. Outside the store, a security camera captured a vehicle parked near the entrance. A dark-colored sedan. Investigators tried to enhance the image. The license plate could not be read. The driver could not be identified. The vehicle remained only a possibility. Then a witness came forward. A truck driver said he had seen Laura's car on a rural road shortly after 7 o'clock. He remembered another vehicle behind it. A dark sedan. The truck driver could not remember the make. He could not identify the driver. But he remembered something unusual. The sedan had followed Laura for several miles. Then both vehicles disappeared from his view. Investigators began considering the possibility that Laura had been followed. That created their first serious lead. Who would follow her? Why? And where had the second vehicle gone? Police interviewed co-workers. They discovered that Laura had recently been involved in a dispute with a former employee named Daniel Voss. Voss had worked at the same manufacturing company. He had left several months earlier after a conflict with management. Some co-workers said Laura had been involved in the disciplinary process. Others said she had simply handled paperwork. Voss reportedly blamed several people for losing his job. Laura's name appeared among them. Investigators contacted him. Voss denied following Laura. He denied seeing her that evening. He claimed he had been home. His wife confirmed the story. But investigators discovered a problem. His vehicle was a dark sedan. The description matched the witness's account. Still, that was not enough. Thousands of dark sedans were on Ohio roads in 1999. Police needed something connecting Voss to Laura. They searched his vehicle. Nothing obvious was found. No blood. No weapon. No clothing. No jewelry. No evidence that would survive court. Voss remained a person of interest. But without more, the investigation stalled. Then another possibility emerged. Laura had been dating someone. His name was Eric Dalton. Their relationship had ended several weeks earlier. Dalton admitted they had argued. He admitted he had called Laura repeatedly. But he denied harming her. His alibi was stronger than Voss's. He had been working at a restaurant that night. Multiple co-workers remembered seeing him. He was eliminated as a primary suspect. The case returned to uncertainty. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Laura was still missing. The community began to change. The initial search parties disappeared. The television crews moved on. The posters on telephone poles faded. People stopped talking about the case every day. But Laura's family did not stop. Her mother kept her bedroom unchanged. Her father continued calling investigators. Her friends held an annual gathering. Every October, they remembered the night she disappeared. The police file grew thicker. But the answers did not. Then, nearly a year later, something terrible happened. Human remains were discovered in a wooded area approximately 18 miles from where Laura's car had been abandoned. Investigators arrived. The remains were badly decomposed. Identification took time. Dental records eventually confirmed what the family had feared. Laura Mercer had been found. The missing person case became a homicide investigation. And with that came the question that had haunted investigators from the beginning. How had she gotten there? The location was remote. There were no houses nearby. No businesses. No cameras. No había witnesses. Investigators searched the surrounding area. They found fragments of clothing, a belt buckle, a broken piece of plastic, several small objects, but no weapon. The medical examiner could not determine the exact cause of death. There was evidence of trauma, but decomposition had destroyed much of the information investigators needed. The case was now officially a murder. But murder without a clear cause of death is one of the hardest cases to prosecute. Investigators returned to Laura's car. The vehicle was processed again. This time, forensic technicians searched more aggressively. They collected fibers, hair, latent fingerprints, soil, anything that might have been transferred during a struggle. One sample stood out. A reddish-brown stain on the edge of the passenger seat. The sample was too degraded for a definitive DNA profile, but it was preserved. Another clue. Another piece of the puzzle. Then investigators discovered something else. A small piece of black plastic was found beneath the driver's seat. It appeared to have broken from an unknown object. Nobody knew what. The object was placed in evidence. The case remained active. But no suspect could be charged. The years began passing. Then, 2004. The detectives who had worked the case were reassigned. New investigators inherited the file. The evidence remained. The mystery remained. And eventually, the case became what law enforcement calls a cold case. Not closed. Not forgotten. Just waiting. The family waited too. Laura's mother aged. Her father stopped attending annual press conferences. Friends married. Had children. Moved away. The town changed. Businesses closed. Roads were rebuilt. The landscape near the crime scene changed. But the evidence box remained in storage. Inside it was the silver earring, the fibers, the plastic fragment, the degraded biological sample, and something else, a tiny metal clasp. It had been recovered from Laura's car, but never identified. Investigators had assumed it belonged to her handbag. The clasp was cataloged, then forgotten. That tiny object would eventually become the hidden clue that broke the case wide open. But not yet. For years, nobody knew what it was. The evidence remained sealed. Modern forensic science was still developing. DNA databases expanded. Laboratory techniques improved. Investigators began using genealogy to identify unknown individuals. Old fingerprints could be enhanced. Tiny biological traces could produce usable profiles. Objects once considered meaningless could suddenly become valuable. And somewhere in Ohio, inside an evidence room, Laura's case waited for those technologies to catch up. 25 years after she disappeared, a new cold case investigator named Hannah Cole reopened the file. She did not begin with the suspects. She began with the evidence. That decision would change everything. Cole had a reputation for questioning old assumptions. Her philosophy was simple. If the evidence had been collected correctly, it deserved another look. She reviewed the original reports. She noticed inconsistencies. The first report said Laura's passenger door was slightly open. Another said it was fully open. One report described the car as clean. Another mentioned a small reddish stain. One witness said the dark sedan was behind Laura for several miles. Another said it was only visible briefly. None of those contradictions solved the case. But they suggested that the original investigation had been built on incomplete information. Cole requested every surviving piece of evidence. The boxes arrived. She opened them one by one. The silver earring. The fibers. The plastic fragment. The biological samples. The metal clasp. She studied the clasp. It was small. Maybe an inch long. Metallic. Bent slightly at one end. At first, it looked like a piece of ordinary hardware. Then she compared it with photographs of Laura's clothing. It did not match her handbag. It did not match her jewelry. It did not match her shoes. So where had it come from? Cole sent it for microscopic analysis. The laboratory discovered something unexpected. The clasp contained traces of adhesive. Not ordinary household glue. An industrial adhesive. The type used in certain protective equipment and work garments. Investigators checked Laura's workplace. The company used similar adhesive in protective uniforms. But so did many other businesses. The clue was promising. Not enough. Then the laboratory found something else. A microscopic fragment of fabric remained attached to the clasp. Black. Synthetic. The fibers had a distinctive structure. Cole compared it with the fibers found in Laura's car. They were similar. Not identical enough for an absolute conclusion, but similar. The team now had a new theory. The clasp may have belonged to something worn by the person who had been inside Laura's car. They searched old photographs. Then they found one. A photograph from the company holiday party in 1998. Employees standing together. Smiling. Holding drinks. Among them was Daniel Voss. He was wearing a black work jacket. The jacket had a distinctive metal clasp near the shoulder. Cole enlarged the photograph. The clasp appeared almost identical. Suddenly, the forgotten object in the evidence box had a possible owner. Daniel Voss. The man investigators had questioned in 1999. The man who drove a dark sedan. The man who had a documented conflict with Laura. The man whose original alibi had never been independently verified. But there was still a problem. A photograph could not prove that the clasp came from Voss's jacket. Investigators needed DNA. The metal clasp was examined again. Inside the adhesive residue were microscopic biological traces. The laboratory attempted extraction. The first test failed. The second produced a partial profile. The third test produced enough material for comparison. The profile was male. Investigators obtained a reference sample from Voss through legal process. The profiles were compared. The laboratory reported a match. For the first time in 25 years, investigators had biological evidence connecting Daniel Voss to an object recovered from Laura's vehicle. The case was no longer simply about an old witness statement. It was no longer about a dark sedan. It was no longer about suspicion. A hidden clue had connected a suspect to the crime scene. And suddenly, the cold case was moving again. The next question was devastating. If Voss had been inside Laura's car, why? And why had he lied about seeing her? Investigators reopened his original interview. They listened to every word. At one point, the detective had asked, "Did you ever ride in Laura's car?" "Vas a ser no." Now investigators had evidence suggesting otherwise. They checked his 1999 vehicle records. His dark sedan had been sold 3 months after Laura's disappearance. The buyer had no connection to the case. The vehicle was gone. But another record remained. A repair invoice. 2 weeks after Laura disappeared, Voss had taken the sedan to a body shop. The invoice mentioned damage to the passenger side door. That damage had never been reported to police. The body shop owner was located. He was elderly. His memory was imperfect, but he remembered the car. He remembered the customer. And he remembered something else. There had been blood on the inside edge of the passenger door. He had assumed it came from a cut hand. Now investigators had another connection. Blood. Passenger door. Voss's vehicle. Laura's disappearance. The case was beginning to close around him. But the strongest clue had not yet been found. It was hidden in a place nobody had searched in 1999. The old manufacturing company had changed ownership twice. Most personnel records were gone, but an archived security log survived. And inside that log was a handwritten entry dated October 18, 1999. A vehicle had entered the rear employee lot at 7:12 p.m. The vehicle was a dark sedan. The driver had not been identified, but the security guard had written down part of the license plate. 3 characters. That was all. Investigators compared the fragment with vehicle registrations from 1999. Only one likely match emerged. Daniel Voss. The case had just taken another dramatic turn. The dark sedan seen following Laura was likely Voss's. The car had been near Laura's workplace. The same man had a documented dispute with her. His DNA was found on the mysterious clasp. His vehicle had unexplained passenger side damage. And the original alibi was suddenly looking weaker. Cole requested a second interview. Voss agreed. He was now in his late 50s. When he entered the interview room, investigators placed no evidence on the table. They simply asked him about Laura. He said he remembered her. They asked whether he had seen her on October 18, 1999. He said no. They asked whether he had ever entered her car. Again, no. Then Cole placed the photograph of the clasp on the table. Voss looked at it. His face changed. She asked whether he recognized it. He said no. Cole placed the old photograph of him wearing the black jacket beside it. Silence. Then the DNA report. Still silence. Finally, she asked, "Do you understand why we're here?" Voss stared at the documents. For almost a minute, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "I never meant for this to happen." The room froze. It was not a confession. Not yet. But it was the first sentence in 25 years that suggested the original story had been a lie. And once that sentence was spoken, the entire case began to unravel. The sentence remained in the room long after Daniel Voss had spoken it. "I never meant for this to happen." Hannah Cole did not move. Neither did the detective sitting across from him. There was no dramatic reaction, no raised voice, no sudden accusation. In a cold case interview, silence could be more powerful than confrontation. A suspect who had spent 25 years controlling his story had just introduced something investigators had never heard before: regret. But regret was not guilt. And investigators knew the difference. Cole looked at him carefully. "What didn't you mean to happen?" Voss stared at the table. He rubbed his thumb against the edge of his palm. "I didn't mean for her to die." There it was. The sentence that changed the investigation. For 25 years, Daniel Voss had denied seeing Laura Mercer that night. He had denied following her. He had denied entering her car. He had denied knowing anything about her disappearance. Now he was admitting that something had happened. Something involving Laura. Something that ended with her death. But he still had not explained what. Cole pushed the evidence folder slightly toward him. Then tell us what happened. Voss leaned back. His eyes moved toward the wall. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he began speaking. Slowly. Almost reluctantly. He said he had been angry with Laura. He said she had ruined his life. He blamed her for the disciplinary action that had cost him his job. Cole knew the company records did not support that version. Laura had processed paperwork. She had not personally fired him. But Voss had apparently convinced himself otherwise. He said he believed Laura had been talking about him. He said co-workers had been laughing at him. He said she had made him look dangerous. Cole asked whether he had followed her that evening. Voss hesitated. Then he said yes. He had followed her from work. The dark sedan belonged to him. The security log was correct. The truck driver's memory was correct. The mysterious vehicle behind Laura had not been a coincidence. It had been Voss. For 25 years, investigators had wondered whether the witness had simply mistaken one car for another. Now they had their answer. Voss had followed Laura. But why? He said he wanted to talk. That was his explanation. He wanted to confront her. He wanted her to admit that she had been responsible for his problems. He said he followed her to the convenience store. He waited. Then he followed her again. Cole asked why he didn't simply approach her at the store. Voss said she would have called the police. That answer was important. It suggested he already knew Laura was afraid of him. He knew she did not want contact. Yet he followed her anyway. The interview continued. Voss said Laura eventually noticed him. She drove onto a quieter road. He followed. Then, according to his account, she stopped. Cole asked why. Voss said Laura got out of her car. She was angry. She told him to leave. She threatened to report him. Voss said he became furious. He got out of his sedan. Laura walked toward him. They argued beside the vehicles. He claimed she struck him first. Cole asked whether he had injuries. Voss said he had a scratch. That detail immediately caught investigators' attention. A scratch. Laura had DNA beneath her fingernails. The medical examiner had documented injuries to her hands. And the blue fiber found in her car could have come from clothing torn during a struggle. Voss continued. He said Laura attempted to walk away. He grabbed her arm. She pulled free. He grabbed her again. Then she fell. Cole asked whether he pushed her. Voss said he didn't know. She asked whether he struck her. He looked down. Yes. How many times? I don't remember. Once. I don't remember. More than once. Voss remained silent. Cole waited. Finally, he said, yes. The room became colder. The investigators now had a confession to violence. But they still needed the sequence. Laura had not simply disappeared after an argument. She had been found 18 miles away. Someone had transported her. Someone had abandoned her. Someone had attempted to remove evidence. Voss said he panicked after Laura stopped moving. He claimed he thought she was unconscious. He said he placed her in his car, the dark sedan. The same sedan that had later suffered passenger side damage. The same vehicle associated with the body shop invoice. The same vehicle the truck driver remembered following Laura. Investigators asked how he got her inside. Voss said he carried her. Cole asked whether she was alive. I don't know. You checked? I thought she was breathing. Then why didn't you call an ambulance? Voss did not answer. Cole repeated the question. Still nothing. Finally, Voss said, because I knew they'd arrest me. That answer would later become one of the most important statements in the case. Because even if the fatal injury had been accidental, the decision afterward had been deliberate. He had chosen not to seek help. He had chosen concealment. He had chosen to move Laura. He had chosen to abandon her. He had chosen to lie. And according to investigators, those choices mattered. Voss said he drove for several minutes. He did not know where he was going. He claimed Laura was still breathing. Then he reached the wooded area. He pulled over. He carried her into the trees. He said he left her there. Cole asked whether he knew she was dead. Voss said he thought she might be. The investigator asked why he didn't check. He said he was afraid. Afraid of the police. Afraid of prison. Afraid his life was over. But there was another question. The car. Why had Laura's vehicle been abandoned elsewhere? Voss admitted he had returned to her car. He had driven it away from the original location. He said he wanted to make the disappearance look different. He wanted investigators to believe Laura had left voluntarily. Then he abandoned the car. That explained the strange scene. It explained why her personal belongings were still inside. It explained why her keys were missing. It explained why the passenger door was open. But it created another problem. Why had he left the car where investigators eventually found it? Voss said he did not know. He claimed he had been driving without thinking. Cole asked about the earring. He said he did not remember. She asked about the metal clasp. He said he had never seen it. She asked about the black fabric. No response. Then she asked about his jacket. Voss said he had thrown it away. When? He shrugged. After Laura disappeared? Yes. Why? I was afraid. Afraid of what? Voss didn't answer. Cole asked whether the jacket had blood on it. He said he didn't know. She asked whether Laura had grabbed it. He said maybe. The investigators now had a possible explanation for the hidden clasp. Laura may have torn it loose during the struggle. The microscopic fabric attached to it could have come from Voss's jacket. The adhesive residue could have originated from the jacket's construction. And the DNA recovered from the clasp connected the object to Voss. The clue that had sat unnoticed for 25 years suddenly made sense. But the investigation was not finished. Cole asked about the blood in Voss's sedan. Voss said Laura had been bleeding. That was another major admission. He had previously denied any connection between himself and Laura that night. Now he was acknowledging that her blood could have been inside his vehicle. The body shop records supported him. The damage to the passenger side door supported him. The mechanic's memory supported him. But investigators still needed to know whether the blood could be recovered. The sedan had been destroyed years earlier. No usable biological evidence remained. Yet the old body shop invoice remained. And another document was found. A handwritten note from the shop owner. The note had never been included in the original police file. It read, "Customer requested passenger area cleaned completely. Appeared nervous. Said accident." Cole stared at the note. There was no date written on it. But the invoice number placed it within days of Laura's disappearance. The shop owner was interviewed again. He remembered Voss. He remembered the damage. He remembered the blood. He also remembered Voss repeatedly asking whether the police had contacted the shop. At the time, the owner thought it was strange. Now it looked like fear. Investigators searched for any other evidence connecting Voss to the location where Laura's body had been found. They examined historical maps. The area had changed significantly since 1999. A road had been widened. A drainage channel had been moved. Several trees had been removed. But old survey records showed something interesting. The wooded area where Laura was discovered had once been used by employees of the manufacturing company. Voss knew it. That mattered. He was familiar with the area. He had worked nearby. He knew which roads were poorly traveled. He knew where someone could pull off without being seen. He knew how quickly the area became isolated after dark. The prosecution would later argue that this knowledge made the location significant. The defense would argue that many local residents knew the same roads. Again, the case depended on the entire pattern. Not one clue. Not one statement. The pattern. Voss had motive. He had opportunity. He followed Laura. He lied about following her. His vehicle was seen behind hers. His vehicle had passenger-side damage. His vehicle had unexplained blood. Laura's DNA was associated with evidence from the vehicle. His DNA was found on the mysterious clasp. His clothing was consistent with the fiber evidence. He admitted confronting her. He admitted striking her. He admitted transporting her. He admitted abandoning her. And he had lied about all of it for 25 years. But investigators faced one final obstacle: the precise cause of death. The medical examiner had been unable to determine it conclusively in 1999 because of decomposition. Now forensic anthropology specialists re-examined the remains. Modern imaging was used to study the bones. They discovered something that had been missed during the original examination: a fracture along the skull. Small. Partially healed? No. There was no healing. It had occurred around the time of death. The fracture was consistent with blunt force trauma. It could not establish the exact object used, but it supported Voss's admission that he had struck Laura. The investigators now had physical evidence supporting his statement. The medical examiner issued an amended opinion. The death was consistent with homicide involving blunt force trauma. The case had changed again. 25 years earlier, the cause had been uncertain. Now investigators could identify a likely mechanism: a violent confrontation, a blow to the head, a victim left without medical assistance, and a suspect who admitted being there. The prosecutor reviewed the entire file. Then came the question of charges. Could they prove intentional murder? Could they prove premeditation? Or was the evidence stronger for another homicide charge? The prosecution argued that Voss's actions before the confrontation demonstrated planning. He had followed Laura. He had waited. He had continued following her after she changed direction. He had brought the confrontation to a secluded area. He had a history of anger toward her. And after the attack, he made multiple deliberate decisions to conceal what had happened. The defense disagreed. They argued that Voss had not planned to kill Laura. They argued that the confrontation escalated unexpectedly. They argued that his actions afterward reflected panic, not premeditation. The legal distinction was enormous. The public wanted a simple answer. Was he a murderer? The courtroom needed a more precise answer. What could the evidence prove beyond a reasonable doubt? The prosecutors knew they could not rely on emotion. They had to rely on evidence that could survive cross-examination. So they reconstructed the night minute by minute. 6 p.m. Voss leaves the area of his last known work activity. 6:42 p.m. Laura stops at the convenience store. 7 p.m. The truck driver sees Laura's vehicle. A dark sedan follows. 7:12 p.m. A dark sedan enters the rear employee lot. 7:18 p.m. Laura's final known communication. 7:19 p.m. The photograph. Later that night, Laura's vehicle is abandoned. Days later, Voss's sedan is repaired. The passenger side is damaged. Blood is present. Years later, The vehicle is destroyed. The evidence disappears. But not all of it. The clasp remains. The fiber remains. The DNA remains. The photograph remains. The records remain. The memories remain. And now Voss has spoken. The timeline was no longer an empty road. It was a sequence of choices. The investigators returned to Laura's final message. I know what you did, Daniel. What did she know? That question had remained unanswered for decades. Voss finally explained. Laura knew he had been following her. She had photographs. She had written down his license plate. She had planned to report him. She had told a coworker she was afraid. She had been gathering evidence. Voss said he knew she had enough to destroy his life. That was why he confronted her. The prosecution believed this established motive. The defense would later argue that it established only anger. But there was another detail. The investigators asked Voss whether Laura had threatened to expose him for anything beyond following her. He said no. Then why did she say she knew what you did? Voss looked at the detective. She knew I was watching her. That was his answer. It was enough. For investigators, it explained the message. For Rebecca's case years earlier, a similar message had become central. Now Laura's message served the same purpose. A victim had attempted to leave a record. She knew the person near her was dangerous. She wanted someone to know. The investigators searched her computer again. They found an unfinished document. It contained notes about Voss. Dates. Times. Descriptions. One entry read that his dark sedan had appeared near her apartment. Another mentioned seeing him outside her workplace. The document had been created days before her disappearance. It had never been sent. Laura had been building her own case. And now, 25 years later, those notes became evidence. Her computer had been stored by her family. Unlike the original police system, the files had not been overwritten. Investigators recovered additional metadata. The notes had been created on Laura's computer. The timestamps were consistent with the period before her disappearance. That was important. It meant the information had not been added later. Laura had documented Voss before she died. She had been trying to protect herself. The investigation now shifted toward the question of whether anyone else knew about the conflict. Several former co-workers were interviewed. One remembered Laura saying, "He keeps following me." Another remembered her asking whether she should report Voss. A third recalled seeing the dark sedan near the building. None of these witnesses could identify Voss with absolute certainty. But their statements were consistent with Laura's own records. The defense could challenge each memory individually. Together, they formed another layer in the timeline. The prosecution's case was becoming a mosaic. No single tile showed the entire picture. But when the pieces were placed together, the image was unmistakable. Then investigators found one more witness. The former security guard. He had been working at the manufacturing company in 1999. He was now living several states away. When investigators contacted him, he initially said he remembered nothing. Then they showed him the old security log. His handwriting. His initials. The entry. He stared at it for a long time. Then he remembered. He said the dark sedan had entered the rear lot. He remembered Voss. He had seen him before. The guard said Voss looked angry. He had asked where Laura was. The guard told him she had already left. Voss drove away. That meant Voss had actively searched for Laura at her workplace. He had not simply encountered her by chance. He had been looking for her. The prosecutor now had a stronger theory. Voss had gone to the workplace. He had missed Laura. He followed her. He confronted her. The confrontation became violent, and afterward, he concealed what happened. But there was still a question nobody could answer. Did Voss intend to kill her? That question would become the center of the legal battle. The prosecution argued that intent could be inferred from conduct. The defense argued that intent could not be assumed. Voss had not brought a weapon, according to the evidence. He had not explicitly threatened to kill Laura. He had not purchased anything associated with the crime. There was no written plan, no recording. No witness heard him announce an intention to murder her. The prosecutor knew the distinction mattered, but she also knew what happened after Laura was injured. Voss had opportunities to stop. He could have called emergency services. He could have taken her to a hospital. He could have gone to the police. He could have told someone. He did none of those things. Instead, he moved her body. He abandoned her. He disposed of evidence. He lied. And then he lived normally for 25 years. That was not the behavior of someone who had simply forgotten an accident. It was the behavior of someone who knew the consequences of the truth. The second interview ended after several hours. Before Voss was taken away, Cole asked one final question. Why did you keep lying? Voss stared at the floor. Because every year I thought it was too late. Cole asked what he meant. He said that after the first year, he believed the police had stopped looking. After 5 years, he believed everyone had moved on. After 10, he believed the evidence was gone. After 20, he believed nobody would ever connect him to Laura. Then he looked at the evidence bag containing the metal clasp. He said, I forgot about that. Cole understood. That was the hidden clue. The object Voss had forgotten existed had survived longer than his lies. The clasp had been cataloged in 1999. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew why it was there. Nobody knew who it belonged to. For 25 years, it remained almost invisible. Then modern testing revealed DNA. The DNA led to Voss. The old photograph connected the clasp to his jacket. The fabric linked the object to the vehicle. And Voss's own statement connected him to Laura. A single forgotten object had broken open a case that had resisted investigators for a quarter of a century. The arrest came days later. When officers arrived at Voss's home, he did not run. He opened the door. He looked at the officers. And according to investigators, he already knew why they were there. The handcuffs closed around his wrists. For the first time since 1999, Daniel Voss was officially connected to Laura Mercer's death. News crews gathered outside. The headlines spread rapidly. Ohio 1999 cold case solved. Hidden clue breaks case wide open. People who had lived in the town for decades remembered Laura. Some remembered the posters. Some remembered the search parties. Some remembered her photograph on television. Others had forgotten. Now they remembered again. Laura's family was contacted before the news became public. Her sister answered the phone. The detective told her that investigators had identified the man responsible. There was silence. Then she asked, "Are you sure?" The detective said yes. Her sister began crying. Not because the pain had disappeared, because the uncertainty had. For 25 years, the family had lived with the possibility that they might never know. Now they knew who had followed Laura. They knew who had confronted her. They knew who had lied. They knew who had tried to erase the trail. And they knew the truth had not vanished. It had been waiting. Waiting inside evidence boxes. Waiting inside old reports. Waiting inside a photograph. Waiting inside a microscopic fragment of DNA. Waiting inside a metal clasp nobody understood. The case had not been solved by luck. It had been solved because someone finally looked again. And as investigators prepared the final prosecution file, one fact stood above everything else. Laura had spent her final days trying to document what was happening to her. She had written down names. She had recorded dates. She had noticed the car. She had told people she was afraid. She had left evidence behind. She could not know that 25 years later, those records would speak for her. But they did. Her voice had survived in the file. Her handwriting had survived. Her photograph had survived. And the smallest piece of metal had survived. A hidden clue no larger than a fingertip. A clue that waded through decades of silence. A clue that investigators almost overlooked. Until one day, someone opened the evidence box and asked the question that should have been asked in 1999. What is this? The answer would lead directly to Daniel Voss. And for the first time in 25 years, the word unknown began disappearing from Laura Mercer's case. But an arrest was not the end. It was the beginning of the final fight. Because now the prosecution had to prove that the man who had spent 25 years denying everything was responsible for what happened on that dark Ohio road. And every piece of evidence would have to survive one last test. A courtroom. A jury. And the question that had haunted the case since 1999. Was the hidden clue enough to finally reveal the whole truth? The answer would not come easily, because a cold case does not become simple merely because a suspect has been arrested. An arrest creates a new kind of uncertainty. Before, the question was who had done it. Now the question was whether the evidence could prove it. For 25 years, the name Daniel Voss had existed in the margins of Laura Mercer's disappearance, first as a disgruntled former employee, then as a person of interest, and finally as the man investigators believed had followed her into the darkness. But suspicion was not enough. A courtroom demanded more. Every photograph had to be authenticated. Every laboratory result had to be explained. Every witness had to face questions about memory. Every contradiction had to be examined. And every piece of evidence that had survived since 1999 would have to survive something even more difficult: doubt. The first challenge came almost immediately. The defense requested the original evidence records. Boxes were opened. Photographs were reviewed. Chain of custody documents were examined. The metal clasp that had become the centerpiece of the investigation had changed hands several times over the years. It had been collected by the original crime scene team, logged into evidence, transferred during the investigation, and eventually placed into long-term storage. The defense wanted to know whether contamination could have occurred. Could someone have touched the clasp after it was collected? Could DNA from another investigation have been introduced? Could the biological material have been transferred during modern testing? The laboratory director was prepared for the questions. He explained that the clasp had remained sealed for years. The original packaging was still intact. The evidence number matched the 1999 report. The seal had been opened only when the cold case team requested additional testing. The defense pressed harder. Was the original packaging perfect? No. Nothing stored for 25 years was perfect. Could contamination theoretically occur? Yes. Was there evidence that contamination had occurred? No. That distinction became critical. The prosecution was not claiming that science was infallible. They were arguing that the laboratory procedures, documentation, and genetic results created a reliable connection. The jury listened. The metal clasp was displayed on a large monitor. It looked almost absurdly ordinary. A small piece of metal. A bend at one end. A darkened area where adhesive residue remained. Nothing about it looked like the key to a murder. Yet that object had changed the direction of the entire case. The prosecutor asked the laboratory analyst to explain how the DNA had been recovered. The analyst described the process. The clasp had first been photographed. Then it was examined under magnification. The laboratory identified areas where biological material might remain. Those areas were carefully sampled. The first extraction produced little usable material. The second produced a partial profile. The third produced a profile strong enough for comparison. The DNA belonged to a male. It was consistent with Daniel Voss. The defense attorney asked the question everyone expected. How rare is this profile? The analyst gave the statistical estimate. The probability of finding an unrelated individual with the same profile was extraordinarily small. The exact statistical language was complicated. The prosecutor later simplified it for the jury. The DNA did not merely say that the person was male. It pointed overwhelmingly toward one individual, Daniel Voss. But the defense had another argument. Even if the DNA belonged to Voss, it did not prove when the DNA arrived on the clasp. That was true. The laboratory could not date DNA. It could not say the biological material was deposited on October 18, 1999. It could only establish the genetic identity. The defense repeated the point. The prosecution did not deny it. Instead, the prosecutor moved to the next piece of evidence. The black fiber. Under the microscope, the laboratory analyst showed the jury the structure of the fibers. They were synthetic. They had a distinctive pattern. The same general structure was found on the clasp and in the passenger compartment of Laura's car. Then came the photograph of Voss. Company holiday party. Dozens of employees. Voss standing near the back, wearing a black work jacket. The clasp visible near the shoulder. The prosecutor enlarged the photograph. The jury could see it. A small metal fastener. Similar shape. Similar placement. The defense objected that the photograph was too old and too unclear to establish that the objects were identical. The judge agreed that the photograph could not prove identity by itself, but it could be considered alongside other evidence. And that was becoming the central strategy of the prosecution. Not one clue. The chain. The defense attacked that chain piece by piece. They said the fiber was not unique. They said the photograph was ambiguous. They said the DNA could have been deposited at another time. They said the witness memories were decades old. They said the blood in the old vehicle could not be tested. They said the medical examiner could not establish precisely when the fatal injury occurred. And they said Voss's confession was incomplete. It was an unusual defense. They did not deny everything. Instead, they attacked certainty. They wanted the jury to believe that the state had assembled a compelling story around evidence that remained fundamentally ambiguous. Then the prosecution introduced the old security log. The original handwritten document was placed inside a transparent protective sleeve. The former security guard took the witness stand. His hands trembled slightly as he looked at the page. He confirmed that it was his handwriting. He confirmed his initials. He confirmed the date. Then the prosecutor asked him about the entry. A dark sedan. 7:12 p.m. Rear employee lot. The witness said he remembered seeing the vehicle. The defense asked how he could remember something from 25 years earlier. He admitted that he could not remember every detail. He could not remember the weather. He could not remember exactly what the driver was wearing. He could not remember the exact make of the car. But the document had been written that night. His memory was not being offered alone. The record preserved what he had observed when the event was fresh. The defense attorney held up the document. Is this your handwriting? Yes. Did you personally record the plate? Yes. Do you remember why? The witness paused. Because the driver asked about Laura. The courtroom went silent. The prosecutor asked what he meant. The guard explained that Voss had entered the lot looking for Laura. He had asked whether she was still working. The guard said she had already left. Voss appeared frustrated. Then he drove away. The defense immediately challenged the statement. The original report had not included this conversation. The guard admitted it. Why had it not been included? He said he did not know. Maybe the officer had not asked. Maybe he had forgotten to mention it. Maybe he had not considered it important at the time. The defense suggested that the memory had been reconstructed over the years. The guard denied it. He said he remembered the interaction because Voss had been angry. But memory is complicated. A person can remember the emotion of an event while forgetting its exact details. That ambiguity remained. The prosecution knew it, so they did not depend on the witness alone. They introduced Laura's own computer records. The old computer had been preserved by her family. The machine itself no longer functioned normally, but the hard drive contained fragments. Technicians extracted files. Some were damaged. Some were incomplete. Others were intact. Among them was Laura's unfinished document. The prosecutor displayed the first page. The jury saw Laura's handwriting in digital form. Names, dates, vehicle descriptions, short notes. The document was not a diary. It was a record of incidents involving Daniel Voss. One entry described seeing his sedan near her apartment. Another mentioned repeated phone calls. Another described seeing him outside the manufacturing plant. And then there was an entry from October 16, 1999, 2 days before Laura disappeared. She had written that Voss had approached her at work. She had told him not to contact her again. She had written that she was afraid he might become violent. The defense argued that the document showed only that Laura feared Voss. Fear was not proof that he killed her. The prosecutor agreed. But fear had context. Laura had documented a pattern. Voss had acknowledged following her. The pattern and the confession were beginning to overlap. Then came the phone records. In 1999, mobile phone records were far less detailed than they are today. There was no constant GPS history. There was no modern location timeline. But carrier records preserved call information. Investigators obtained archived records showing several calls between Voss and Laura in the days before her disappearance. The defense argued that they had once been co-workers. Calls were not unusual. The prosecution did not claim otherwise. But the frequency changed. On October 17th, there were 3 calls. 2 were unanswered. On October 18th, there was 1 call shortly before Laura left work. It lasted less than a minute. The prosecution could not prove what was said. The defense emphasized that there was no recording, no transcript, no way to know what happened during the call. But the timing mattered. Voss had admitted that he wanted to confront Laura. He had admitted following her. He had admitted seeing her that night. The phone record showed that contact had occurred shortly before the confrontation. Again, another tile. Another piece. The jury was beginning to see the picture. But the most emotional testimony came from Laura's sister. She walked into the courtroom carrying a photograph. The prosecutor asked her about Laura. Not the murder. Not the suspect. Laura. What was she like? Her sister smiled. She talked about Laura's habit of leaving notes. The way she organized everything. The way she hated missing family dinners. The way she would call their mother on her way home. She described the night Laura disappeared. The waiting. The unanswered calls. The police arriving. The first search. The days without sleep. Then the discovery of the remains. Her voice broke. She said the family had spent years asking whether Laura had suffered. They asked whether she had been afraid. They asked whether she knew what was happening. They asked whether someone could have helped her. There were no answers. The defense did not challenge her memories. There was nothing to challenge. But the emotional weight of her testimony was enormous. For the first time, the jury understood that this was not simply an investigation. It was a family that had spent a quarter-century living inside a question. When the sister finished speaking, she looked toward Voss. He did not look back. She held up the photograph. It showed Laura laughing. Not Laura in the evidence photographs. Not Laura in a police report. Just Laura. Alive. The courtroom remained silent. Then the prosecutor asked one final question. What do you want the jury to know about your sister? The sister answered. She was not a case. She was a person. The prosecutor thanked her. She stepped down. The defense remained silent. The trial continued. The prosecution then presented the medical evidence. The forensic anthropologist explained the skull fracture. The injury was consistent with blunt force trauma. The defense asked whether it could have been caused by a fall. Possibly. Could it have been caused by an accident? Possibly. Could the investigator determine the exact object? No. Could the investigator determine the exact moment of injury? Not precisely. The defense appeared satisfied. But then the prosecutor asked another question. Is the injury consistent with the account provided by Daniel Voss? Yes. The analyst explained that it was consistent with a blow sustained during a physical confrontation. The defense argued that consistency was not causation. Again, correct. But the prosecution had never claimed otherwise. The case was becoming a battle over probability. What explanation best fit all the evidence? An unknown person had somehow encountered Laura. That person had somehow entered her vehicle. That person had somehow left biological material. That person had somehow left a piece of clothing hardware. That person had somehow been seen following her. That person had somehow been connected to her prior fears. And Daniel Voss had independently admitted that he followed her, confronted her, struck her, transported her, and abandoned her. The defense needed the jury to believe that the physical evidence and Voss's admissions were unrelated coincidences. That was a difficult argument. But there was still one major issue. The confession. The defense challenged its reliability. Voss had been questioned years after the crime. Investigators already suspected him. They had shown him evidence. They had told him about the DNA. Could his statement have been influenced by information investigators provided? Cole denied feeding him facts. The interview recording was played for the jury. The room listened. The detective's voice. Voss's voice. Long stretches of silence. Questions. Answers. More silence. At one point, Cole asked Voss where Laura's body had been left. Voss described the general area. He mentioned a fallen tree, a drainage channel, a narrow path. Investigators had not told him those details. And when they compared his description with the historical crime scene, several details matched. The defense argued that those details were publicly available. The prosecution countered that they were not widely reported. Then Cole asked Voss about Laura's earring. He said he did not remember seeing it. That mattered, because the earring had been found near the location where Laura's car had been abandoned, not near the place where her remains were discovered. The defense argued that this proved nothing. The prosecution argued that it fit the theory of a struggle near the vehicle. The jury had to decide. Then something unexpected happened. During the trial, a retired detective contacted the prosecutor's office. He had worked the original case. He had been one of the officers who processed Laura's car. He said he had remembered something. Not a dramatic confession. Not a hidden recording. A detail. When the car was first examined, there had been a faint smell of industrial solvent inside. The detective had assumed it came from maintenance work. He had not considered it important. The prosecutor asked whether he had written it down. He said yes. The note was found, buried in the original field report. Strong chemical odor inside passenger compartment. The defense objected to its relevance. The judge allowed it. The prosecutor asked whether the detective knew what kind of solvent it was. No. But investigators knew something now that they did not know in 1999. Voss's former workplace used an industrial cleaning compound containing similar solvents. That did not prove he had used it, but it provided a possible explanation for why the passenger compartment had smelled unusual. The defense argued that countless industrial workers could have smelled the same. Again, true. But the prosecutor asked whether the smell was consistent with an attempt to clean the interior. The detective said it could be. The defense objected. The judge instructed the jury that the statement was not a definitive forensic conclusion. The point remained. Someone had apparently attempted to clean the vehicle. The body shop record supported that. The blood supported that. The passenger side damage supported that. And the suspect had later admitted transporting Laura. The case was tightening, but there was one piece of evidence the defense had not expected. A handwritten map. It was found among Voss's old belongings. Investigators had obtained a search warrant after the arrest. The map was folded inside a box. It showed the rural road surrounding the area where Laura's body had been found. One location was circled, the exact place where Laura's remains had been discovered. The defense immediately claimed the map was meaningless. Voss had lived in the area. He could have marked it for any reason. There was no date, no fingerprint, no note, nothing proving when he had drawn the circle. But investigators compared the map with an older document from 1999. The roads had changed. One road had been rerouted. Yet the map reflected the road configuration from the late 1990s. That meant the map was old. Very old. Possibly from the time of the murder. The prosecutor asked Voss about it. He claimed not to remember drawing it. That answer did not help. Then investigators noticed something else. A handwritten number appeared beside the circled location. The distance between Laura's abandoned car and the body site was approximately 18 miles. The defense argued that this was coincidence. The prosecutor argued otherwise. Still, the evidence was circumstantial. No one had watched Voss kill Laura. No weapon had been recovered. No recording captured the confrontation. No eyewitness saw the fatal blow. There was no perfect piece of evidence. The case depended on accumulation. And that is often what makes a cold case so difficult. The truth is rarely waiting in one dramatic object. It is scattered. A fragment here. A statement there. A forgotten record. A biological trace. A photograph. A mistake in an old timeline. A witness who remembers one sentence. A suspect who eventually says one thing too many. The trial moved toward its final stage. The prosecution presented the hidden clue one more time. The metal clasp. The object that had been collected in 1999. The object that had remained unidentified for 25 years. The object that carried Voss's DNA. The object that contained fabric consistent with his jacket. The object that fit the physical evidence from the vehicle. The prosecutor held up a photograph of it. This object waited longer than the investigation did. The defense objected to the rhetoric. The judge sustained part of the objection. But the meaning was clear. The clue had survived. The case had not. Until now. Then the prosecutor asked the jury to imagine the final moments from the evidence. Not with cinematic certainty. Not with invented details. Only what the evidence supported. Laura leaves work. She receives a brief call. She drives away. A dark sedan follows. She stops. She confronts the person following her. A struggle occurs. A piece of clothing tears. A clasp falls. Laura is injured. Her attacker moves her. Her car is abandoned. Her belongings remain. Her body is taken to a remote area. The attacker cleans his vehicle. He disposes of his clothing. He lies to investigators. 25 years pass. Then the clasp is tested. DNA points to Voss. Voss is questioned. He says he followed Laura. He says he confronted her. He admits striking her. He admits transporting her. He admits abandoning her. The prosecutor looked at the jury. That is not one coincidence, she said. That is a chain. The defense stood for its final argument. They reminded the jury that the prosecution still had gaps. They asked why there was no murder weapon, why there was no definitive time of death, why no eyewitness had seen the actual killing, why the DNA could not be dated, why the clasp could not conclusively be proven to have come from Voss's jacket, why the original investigators had not charged him. They argued that the case had been transformed by hindsight. They argued that investigators now knew Voss was the suspect, and therefore every old clue seemed to point toward him. They asked the jury not to convict based on a story. They asked them to convict only if the evidence proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The judge then gave the jury instructions. They left the courtroom. The doors closed. Laura's family remained seated. Voss sat beside his attorneys. Nobody knew whether the deliberations would last hours or days. Outside, the media waited. Inside, 25 years of evidence sat on the table. The clasp, the photographs, the records, the DNA, the statements, the map, the old security log, and the confession. The jury began with the evidence. They examined the clasp. They reviewed the DNA report. They listened again to the interview. They studied Laura's notes. They considered the medical findings. They debated the timeline. One juror questioned whether the DNA on the clasp could have been transferred years before the murder. Another asked whether there was any evidence that Voss had worn the jacket on the night Laura disappeared. The prosecutor had no direct proof, but the photograph established that he owned it. A former coworker testified that he wore it frequently. The fiber evidence was consistent. The defense still had an argument. The jury debated it. Then one juror returned to the confession. Voss had admitted facts investigators had not publicly released. He knew where Laura had been taken. He knew she had been moved. He knew she had been inside his vehicle. He knew he had struck her. Those were not ordinary details. They were details connecting him to the crime. The jury deliberated through the afternoon. Then evening. The courthouse lights remained on. Laura's family waited. At approximately 9:17 p.m., the jury sent a note. They requested the transcript of Voss's interview. Everyone in the courtroom knew what that meant. They were focusing on his words. The transcript was delivered. The jury continued. Another hour passed. Then another. At 11:06 p.m., the bailiff appeared at the courtroom door. The jury had reached a verdict. Laura's mother gripped her daughter's photograph. Voss stood. The jury entered. One by one, they took their seats. The clerk asked for the verdict. The foreperson stood. The room became completely silent. The verdict was read. Guilty. The word landed with almost no sound. But for Laura's family, it carried 25 years of weight. Her sister began crying. Her mother closed her eyes. Voss stared forward. The judge thanked the jury. The legal proceedings continued. But the moment that mattered had already happened. The unknown had become known. The missing person had become a homicide victim. The person of interest had become a convicted killer. And the smallest clue in the entire investigation had helped bring the case to its final chapter. The metal clasp was placed back into evidence. It would never again be described as an unidentified object. Its history had been reconstructed. Its significance had been established. It had survived the crime scene. It had survived the investigation. It had survived years of storage. It had survived changing detectives, changing technology, changing laboratories, changing memories. And eventually it spoke, not with words, with DNA, with fabric, with context, with a connection that had been invisible in 1999, visible in 2024. And by the time the courtroom doors closed that night, everyone understood something that investigators had learned the hard way. Time does not always destroy evidence. Sometimes it protects it. Sometimes a clue can sit quietly for decades, waiting for the right question. The real mystery was never whether the evidence existed. It was whether anyone would recognize what it meant. For 25 years, nobody did. Then someone opened the box. Someone looked closer. And a forgotten piece of metal changed everything. The verdict did not erase the questions. It only changed who was responsible for answering them. For the first time since October 1999, Laura Mercer's family could say the name of the man convicted in her death without adding the words allegedly or possible suspect. Daniel Voss had been found guilty. The courtroom had accepted the chain of evidence. The pursuit, the confrontation, the physical evidence, the concealed vehicle, the years of deception, and above all, the tiny metal clasp that had remained hidden in an evidence box for a quarter of a century. But outside the courthouse, another story was beginning. People wanted to know how investigators had missed it. How could something so important have been collected in 1999 and then ignored for 25 years? How could a tiny object survive while the case itself nearly disappeared? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all was this. How close had investigators come to the truth the first time? The answer was uncomfortable. Very close. The original detectives had possessed many of the pieces. They had Laura's car. They had the earring. They had the fiber. They had the bloodstain. They had Voss's name. They had the conflict between him and Laura. They had the dark sedan. They had witnesses. They had his strange behavior after the disappearance. But they did not have the technology to connect those pieces with enough certainty. And they did not have the one thing every investigation needs when evidence is ambiguous. Time. In 1999, investigators were racing against time. They had a missing woman, a growing search area, a frightened family, a community demanding answers, and almost no forensic technology capable of extracting a complete story from microscopic traces. Today, investigators could look at the same evidence differently. That did not mean modern detectives were smarter. It meant the tools had changed. The evidence had not. That distinction became the central lesson of the Laura Mercer case. The crime scene had spoken in 1999. Nobody knew how to translate it. The first clue was the vehicle. Laura's car had been abandoned on an isolated stretch of road. At the time, investigators focused heavily on the possibility that Laura had voluntarily left. There was no obvious blood trail. No obvious weapon. No broken window. No visible sign of a violent struggle. Her belongings remained inside. To some investigators, that suggested she may have known the person who approached her. To others, it suggested she had left the vehicle willingly. But one detail did not fit either theory. The passenger seat. It had been pushed backward. Not dramatically. only enough to be noticed when the original investigators reconstructed the scene. Laura was shorter than Daniel Voss. The seat position suggested that someone taller had occupied it. But in 1999, that observation was considered circumstantial. People borrowed cars. People moved seats. Passengers adjusted them. It could have happened for dozens of innocent reasons. So it was documented, then set aside. The second clue was the black fiber, a microscopic fragment recovered from the passenger area. At the time, investigators could identify its general material. Synthetic. Dark. Possibly from clothing. But that description applied to countless garments. There was no database allowing investigators to compare one microscopic fiber against millions of jackets. There was no automated system, no advanced chemical mapping, no rapid comparison technology. It was simply a fiber. Useful perhaps, but not decisive. Then there was the blood. A small reddish-brown stain near the passenger side door. The sample was preserved. Investigators attempted testing. The material was degraded. The result was inconclusive. Another dead end. Then the metal clasp. A tiny object that seemed to have no obvious purpose. It was catalogued, placed into evidence, and forgotten. That was the clue that changed everything. But even that clue did not begin its journey in the modern laboratory. It began in Laura's car. Someone had lost it. Someone had been close enough to Laura for it to break away. Someone had left it behind. And whoever that person was had no idea that the object would survive. The original crime scene technician later testified that the clasp was found beneath the edge of the passenger side floor area. It was not sitting openly on the carpet. It was partially hidden. That mattered. It meant it had likely been pushed or kicked beneath the mat during the struggle. In 1999, that was an interpretation. In a reopened investigation, it became a possibility worth testing. The laboratory examined the object under magnification. Tiny scratches crossed its surface. Some were consistent with contact against hard material. Others appeared fresher. A small area of adhesive remained attached. And within that adhesive were microscopic traces of fabric. The fabric was black. The same general type of synthetic fiber had been recovered from Laura's car. The investigators now had a question. Could the clasp have broken from the black jacket worn by Daniel Voss? They obtained old photographs. Not one. Dozens. Co-workers. Company events. Identification photographs. Old newspaper images. Images from the period immediately surrounding Laura's disappearance. The jacket appeared again and again. Voss wore it frequently. The clasp was visible. That did not prove the object belonged to him. But it established something important. Voss had possessed a garment with a fastening mechanism consistent with the recovered object. The defense later argued that this was not unique. They were correct. Many jackets had metal clasps. Many garments contained similar fibers. The prosecution never claimed otherwise. The strength of the evidence came from the combination. And then the DNA changed the calculation. The laboratory extracted a profile from biological material associated with the clasp. It was not perfect. It did not contain every genetic marker. But it was sufficient. The profile was consistent with Daniel Voss. That result forced investigators to revisit everything. If Voss's DNA was on the clasp, how did it get there? There were several possibilities. He could have touched the object at some earlier point. Someone else could have transferred his DNA. The object could have belonged to him and later reached Laura's vehicle. Or the clasp could have broken from his clothing during the confrontation. Only one of those explanations fit the entire case. And that was the problem for Voss. The evidence did not exist in isolation. The clasp was inside Laura's car. Voss admitted he had been inside Laura's car. The black fiber was inside the same vehicle. Voss owned a black jacket with a matching type of fastener. Laura had documented her fear of him. A witness had seen his dark sedan following Laura. The security log placed that sedan near her workplace. His vehicle later showed passenger side damage. A mechanic remembered blood inside the vehicle. And Voss had lied about seeing Laura. One lie might be meaningless. Two might be coincidence. But his entire story had changed. In the original investigation, he said he had not seen Laura. In the reopened investigation, he admitted following her. Initially, he denied entering her car. Later, he admitted moving her. Initially, he claimed he had no involvement. Later, he admitted striking her. Initially, he said he knew nothing about her disappearance. Later, he described where he had taken her. That progression became devastating. The defense tried to explain it. Voss had been under pressure. He had been confronted with evidence. He was frightened. He wanted to end the interview. He was confused by events that had happened decades earlier. But there was a problem with that argument. Some details he provided were not public. He knew things that investigators had not told him. He knew the route. He knew the area. He knew the sequence of events. And he knew Laura had been moved. That knowledge was difficult to explain innocently. The investigators went back to the crime scene. They drove the route themselves. The road looked different. 25 years had changed it. Trees had been cut. New signs had appeared. A drainage ditch had been widened. An old gravel path had disappeared beneath vegetation. But the basic geography remained. The distance between the abandoned car and the location where Laura's remains were discovered was still approximately 18 miles. Voss had described the route without being given a map. That detail became one of the strongest elements of the confession. But there was another piece of the story that bothered investigators. Why had Laura's car been abandoned? If Voss had already taken Laura away, why return to her vehicle? Why not simply leave everything where it was? The answer, according to Voss, was panic. He wanted to make it appear that Laura had disappeared voluntarily. He wanted investigators to search for her somewhere else. He wanted to create uncertainty. And for a while it worked. That uncertainty lasted 25 years. The abandoned car became one of the defining images of the case. A vehicle sitting alone beside a dark road. A person inside. Keys missing. A door open. No driver. No explanation. Now investigators believe the scene had been staged. Not perfectly, but deliberately. The missing keys had been removed. The car had been moved. The passenger area had been disturbed. Evidence had been left behind. Evidence had also been cleaned. That last point became particularly important. The body shop records showed that Voss had taken his own vehicle in for repairs shortly after Laura disappeared. The passenger side area required attention. The shop owner remembered blood. He remembered Voss acting nervous. He remembered Voss asking questions about whether police had contacted the shop. At the time, none of those details were enough. 25 years later, they became part of a larger pattern. The defense argued that the shop owner's memory was unreliable. And again, that argument had merit. Human memory changes. People forget. They reconstruct. They absorb information. They confuse dates. That is why the old written note mattered more than the memory alone. The note had been created close to the time of the repair. Passenger area cleaned completely. The handwriting was old. The paper was old. The record had been preserved. The memory could be challenged. The document was harder to dismiss. The prosecution repeatedly returned to that principle. When human memory failed, documents remained. When witnesses forgot, photographs remained. When investigators retired, evidence remained. When technology changed, biological traces remained. And when the suspect believed the case was dead, the evidence was still waiting. The most haunting part of the case was not the discovery of new evidence. It was the discovery that much of the evidence was never truly gone. It had simply been misunderstood. That distinction mattered to Laura's family. For years, they had been told that there was not enough evidence. They had heard that the case was difficult. They had heard that the investigation remained open. But open can sound dangerously close to forgotten. Laura's mother refused to accept that. She kept every newspaper clipping, every photograph, every letter from detectives, every document. She kept Laura's bedroom intact. She kept one of Laura's sweaters in a plastic container. She kept the photograph that had appeared on missing person posters. And she kept the last birthday card Laura had given her. That card was never evidence. It had nothing to do with the murder. But it represented what the case was actually about. A woman. A daughter. A sister. A friend. Someone who had expected to come home. When the conviction was announced, Laura's family did not celebrate. They exhaled. There was a difference. Celebration suggested happiness. There was no happiness in what had happened. There was relief. There was grief. There was anger. There was exhaustion. 25 years of uncertainty had finally ended. But justice did not return Laura. That truth followed the family out of the courthouse. It followed them home. It followed them into the anniversary dates. It followed them when they looked at old photographs. A conviction could answer who. It could explain how. But it could never explain why the last years of Laura's life had been stolen. The family eventually visited the place where her remains had been found. The area was quieter than before. A few trees had grown. The road looked different. There was no dramatic memorial. No giant marker. Just a small arrangement of flowers. Her sister stood there for several minutes. Then she placed a photograph of Laura against a tree. The image showed Laura smiling. The same smile investigators had used on posters. The same smile that had appeared on television. But now there was no missing person headline beneath it. There was no telephone number. No plea for information. Only her name. Laura Mercer. Her sister whispered that they finally knew. That was all. She did not need to say more. The investigation had reached its legal conclusion. But the forensic story continued to attract attention. Experts began discussing the case as an example of evidence preservation. A fiber that had seemed meaningless became useful decades later. A piece of metal that had no apparent value carried DNA. An old digital file preserved a victim's own account. A handwritten security log preserved a detail a witness could no longer fully remember. A repair invoice preserved information that memory alone could not. The case became a demonstration of how cold case investigations work. They do not simply wait for a confession. They revisit assumptions. They question old conclusions. They re-examine physical evidence. They use technology that did not exist when the crime occurred. And sometimes they find that the most important clue was never actually hidden. It was overlooked. The metal clasp became a symbol of that idea. It was not buried in a secret location. It was not discovered by accident in some abandoned building. It had been sitting in official evidence storage the entire time. The police had it. The prosecutors had it. The case file had documented it. But nobody knew what it meant. That is what makes cold cases so haunting. The answer can be physically present while remaining invisible. A clue can sit inches away from investigators and still be a mystery. The technology does not necessarily create the evidence. Sometimes it simply reveals what was already there. In Laura's case, modern DNA analysis transformed the clasp. Without DNA, it was an unidentified piece of metal. With DNA, it became a connection. With the photograph, it became a possible piece of Voss's clothing. With the fiber, it became part of a physical struggle. With the vehicle evidence, it became part of the timeline. With Voss's confession, it became part of the crime. That is how the hidden clue broke the case open. Not alone, but at the center of a chain. There was another lesson buried inside the investigation. The suspect had believed time was his ally. Every year made him safer. Every retired detective meant fewer people remembered. Every destroyed vehicle meant less physical evidence. Every lost document meant fewer questions. Every fading memory made the truth harder to reconstruct. But he misunderstood time. Time had not only weakened the case, it had also improved the tools. The DNA that could not be recovered in 1999 became recoverable decades later. The digital files that seemed unimportant became searchable. The microscopic traces that once meant little became analyzable. The old photograph could be enlarged. The historical records could be cross-referenced. The case could be reconstructed from multiple independent sources. Time had changed both sides. Voss had changed too. He was no longer the man in the 1999 photographs. His hair had turned gray. His posture had changed. His face looked older. But the evidence did not care how old he had become. DNA does not care about age. A photograph does not forget. A document does not become embarrassed. A sealed evidence bag does not decide to remain silent. The clue simply waits. And eventually someone asks the right question. There was still one unanswered detail. The exact moment Laura died. The prosecution could establish a violent confrontation. It could establish that Voss struck her. It could establish that he moved her. But science could not reconstruct every second. There would always be uncertainty. The family understood that. They did not receive a perfect reconstruction. They received something more important. The truth supported by evidence. Laura had not disappeared voluntarily. She had not simply walked away. She had been followed. She had been confronted. She had been attacked. And the man responsible had spent 25 years pretending he knew nothing. That was enough. For the family, the cold case had finally stopped being a question. It had become history. The investigators eventually returned the remaining personal effects to Laura's relatives. The silver earring. Several photographs. A few documents. Other objects were retained as evidence. The metal clasp remained in official custody. It had become too important to the case to disappear into private hands. One investigator later described it as the smallest object with the biggest story. That description stayed with people, because when the public thinks about solving a murder, they imagine dramatic discoveries. A weapon, a confession, a hidden room, a secret recording. But real investigations are often quieter. A piece of metal, a microscopic fiber, a damaged file, a line in an old logbook, a witness who remembers one detail, a detective willing to reopen a box that everyone else considered finished. That was the real story. Not that technology suddenly produced a killer. Technology gave investigators the ability to ask better questions. The killer had already left evidence. He had simply assumed nobody would understand it. And perhaps that was his greatest mistake. He thought the passage of time had erased the connection. Instead, it had preserved it. 25 years after Laura disappeared, the evidence finally told the story. The abandoned car. the dark sedan, the damaged passenger door, the blood, the black fiber, the metal clasp, the DNA, the old photograph, the forgotten document, the unfinished notes, the confession. All of it pointed toward the same night. All of it pointed toward the same confrontation. And all of it ended at the same terrible conclusion. Laura Mercer should have gone home that evening. She never did. For years, the people who loved her were left with an empty chair, an unanswered phone, and a photograph on a missing person poster. Then one tiny clue changed the direction of the investigation. The clue did not scream. It did not announce itself. It waited quietly beneath the floor area of a vehicle. It waited through detectives, through laboratories, through technology, through decades. And when investigators finally understood what they were looking at, the mystery began to collapse. The cold case that had survived from 1999 into a new century was no longer cold. It had a suspect. It had evidence. It had a confession. And it had a verdict. But perhaps the most unsettling part was still the simplest. The killer had believed the evidence was gone. It wasn't. The truth had been sitting in a box all along. And somewhere inside that box was a piece of metal no larger than a fingertip, carrying the trace that would eventually lead investigators back to the night Laura Mercer disappeared. The years had not buried the clue. They had only hidden its meaning. And once that meaning was uncovered, there was nowhere left for the old story to hide. The conviction changed the official record, but it did not change the night itself. October 18th, 1999, remained exactly where it had always been, buried inside old reports, faded photographs, handwritten notes, and memories that had grown weaker with every passing year. The courtroom had given Laura Mercer's family an answer, but the deeper reconstruction of those final hours was only beginning. Investigators wanted to know not simply whether Daniel Voss had been responsible, but how every surviving piece of evidence fit together, where the original investigation had turned away from the truth, and why the smallest object in the entire case had survived when so much else had disappeared. The first thing the cold case team did was rebuild Laura's final day without using anything learned after the arrest. They wanted the timeline exactly as it would have appeared in 1999. No confession. No DNA match. No knowledge of the hidden clasp. Only the original evidence. Laura arrived at work that morning like any other Monday. Coworkers later described her as distracted. Not terrified. Not panicked. Just distracted. She had paperwork waiting. Several calls to return. A meeting scheduled later in the afternoon. Nothing about the morning suggested that it would become the last ordinary day of her life. But beneath that normal surface was something investigators had initially underestimated. Laura had become increasingly uncomfortable around Daniel Voss. The reason was not a single incident. It was accumulation. A look across the parking lot. A phone call. A vehicle appearing where it should not have been. A confrontation at work. A sense that someone was watching. Individually, each event could be dismissed. Together, they formed a pattern. Laura had begun writing things down. That fact changed the way investigators interpreted her unfinished document. In 1999, the notes had not been known to police. They were discovered much later. The document contained dates and observations, but it did not read like a formal complaint. Laura had not written it for investigators. She appeared to have written it for herself. That made it more disturbing. She was creating a private record because she was beginning to believe that something might happen. The cold case detectives studied the document line by line. One entry mentioned Voss appearing outside her workplace. Another described his car. Another described a call that made her uncomfortable. Then came the entry dated October 16th, 2 days before she disappeared. Laura wrote that Voss had confronted her. She told him to leave her alone. She wrote that she did not like the way he was looking at her. She wrote that she might need to tell someone. The investigators paused there. Because this was not hindsight. Laura had written those words before her disappearance. She could not have known what would happen. She was not constructing a story for a future investigation. She was documenting something she was experiencing. The team then looked at October 17th. The notes were shorter. Almost nothing. Then October 18th. Nothing. The absence itself was haunting. Laura had been documenting events. Then suddenly, there were no more entries. The final digital timestamp appeared earlier that day. After that, silence. The detectives compared the timestamp with Laura's work schedule. It placed her final note within hours of her disappearance. That gave investigators a new way to understand the timeline. Laura had been preparing to leave work. She had already experienced tension with Voss. She knew he had been watching her. And then, sometime after leaving the workplace, she disappeared. The original investigation had treated her final known movements as a series of disconnected events. The reopened investigation treated them as a sequence. That difference was enormous. At approximately 6:40 p.m., Laura stopped at a convenience store. Security footage from the era was poor. The image was grainy. The cameras were not high definition. The recording had been preserved on an old format. But investigators were able to recover portions of it. Laura entered. She purchased a drink. She spoke briefly with the clerk. Then she left. Nothing appeared unusual, except for one detail. A vehicle remained parked across the street. A dark sedan. It was difficult to identify. The license plate could not be read. But its presence was consistent with the truck driver's statement. The driver had reported seeing a dark sedan following Laura's vehicle. For years, investigators had wondered whether he had confused the sequence. Perhaps the sedan had simply been another driver. Perhaps it had turned onto another road. Perhaps his memory had altered the event. Now, with Voss's admission, the old testimony took on new significance. He had been there. He had followed her. The question was what happened after the convenience store. The route was reconstructed using old maps. Laura drove south, then west. The roads became darker. Traffic decreased. Streetlights disappeared. Houses became farther apart. The truck driver later reported seeing the sedan behind her. Then he lost sight of both vehicles. That was the last independent observation of Laura alive. After that, the investigation entered a blank space. A gap. A stretch of time in which almost anything could have happened. That gap had terrified Laura's family for decades. What happened after she left the main road? Did she realize she was being followed? Did she try to escape? Did she stop because she knew the driver? Did Voss force her to stop? The evidence could not answer every question, but it could answer some. The location where Laura's car was found was not random. The vehicle was positioned in a way that suggested someone had deliberately left it. The passenger door was open. The interior had been disturbed. Her belongings remained inside. Her keys were missing. There was no obvious sign that Laura had packed anything. No suitcase. No change of clothes. No money removed. No indication she had planned to leave. She had simply vanished. The original investigators had considered several possibilities. Abduction. Voluntary disappearance. Foul play. Accidental death. Possible involvement of someone Laura knew. But without a body, the possibilities multiplied. Then the body was discovered, and the case changed from missing person to homicide investigation. Yet the discovery location created another mystery. The place was remote. Why would anyone take Laura there? It was not close to her home. It was not on the most direct route. It was not a place where she had any known reason to go. But Daniel Voss knew the area. That fact had always existed. He had worked nearby. He knew the roads. He knew which sections were quiet. He knew where vehicles could stop without attracting immediate attention. In the original investigation, that knowledge had not been enough to establish anything. After the confession, it became part of the explanation. Investigators retraced the drive. They measured the route. They estimated the time required. The journey was consistent with the window between Laura's last known sighting and the discovery of her abandoned vehicle. There was no impossible gap. No contradiction. No need to invent missing hours. The timeline worked. Then they examined the vehicle evidence again. The passenger side damage on Voss's sedan became one of the most important physical details. The damage had been repaired shortly after Laura disappeared. The mechanic who performed the repair had died years earlier. But the shop record survived.